Well, this is Dateline News and Conversation. We're live this evening. My guest tonight, out in California, KJ Noh, and in Ireland, Finian Cunningham. Uh, we're gonna narrow the focus tonight. There's so much to talk about, but I think we've agreed uh, before we came live that we would do a shout out to Michael Parenti and his importance to all of us who really are searching for truth and involved in the alt media. We're also going to talk about the Jeffrey Epstein revelations. And then we're going to take a look at, on the geopolitical level, what the United States is doing to Iran and Cuba, and whether or not Russia and China, very strong, committed allies to those two countries, what they will do. My guest tonight, I'm happy to welcome KJ Noh from California and Finian Cunningham from Ireland. Guys, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Regis, for having us on.
Pleasure to be with you.
Well, two other members of our group, co-authors of your Killing Democracy, Finian, Dan Kovalik and Jeremy Kuzmarov, were not able to join us, but we're gonna talk tonight about these three topics that I introduced, at least these three. And KJ, I'll start with you. The importance of Michael Parenti.
You know, this is a hard one because he was such an extraordinary character. I would say an extraordinary teacher. And I compare him, without exaggeration, to a political Zen master. He was the closest thing to a Zen master that the Western left has ever seen. He was a Zen master of politics. What I mean by that is he was capable of giving you this kind of lightning stroke of insight that awakens you to political reality. And he had this incredible sense of humor and incredible capacity to make people understand. But almost everything that he has said has been shown to be accurate. You know, decades ago, he was saying things that people are just barely starting to realize that he was aware of. And I think so many of us owe a profound debt to Michael Parenti. I don't think there's anybody who can fill his shoes, but there are people who do, you know, bits and pieces of what he did and are certainly powerfully influenced. And I think it's also important to know that the silencing of Michael Parenti was vicious. Starting in the 1960s and 70s, you know, he was almost killed. He was at a protest against Kent State, and he was beaten within inches of his life by the police. In fact, the police, the cops said that he was actually attempting to kill him. But what happened was that this strike that they were trying to hit him with, another cop was hitting at the same time, and so, you know, funnily enough, if that's even, you know, the correct description, is that one cop was trying to hit him with a killer blow and the other hit him on the side, and it pushed his head aside so that instead of crushing his skull, it displaced his head, and the killer blow just glanced the back of his skull. And there are pictures of him, you know, being, you know, dragged away, you know, bleeding from the head. And then after that, you know, he was taken to court, charged, and he was found guilty by the judge. You know, his idiot lawyer said that he should forego the jury trial and appeal to a judge who was, in the words of, you know, Parenti, the judge was a fascist, but he's fair. And Parenti says the judge was fair procedurally, and then wrote the entire prosecution's case for them into his fascist judgment. And Michael Parenti, you know, was then, you know, convicted. And after that, he never had a platform. in any university, was completely silenced from academia. And instead of giving up on that, he brought his classroom to the people. And so instead of, he made, as they say, lemonade out of lemons. Instead of being silenced, he just simply expanded the scope, wrote foundational books that help you understand the world. He did these extraordinary lectures where thousands would turn up. And as I said, he would give people this kind of lightning stroke of insight. And then, even then, after that, he was silenced. There was a constant attempt to deplatform him. Even before that was, a common word, deplatforming somebody or canceling somebody. There was this constant attempt to cancel him. And then starting around the 2000s and after the Yugoslavian, assault, NATO assault on Yugoslavia, he was almost completely canceled. And he struggled, but still, he cut through the fog and he told the truth on so many important issues, on Tibet, on, quote, conspiracy theories, on imperialism in general. And really, I think, he was, as I said, the fierce Zen master of political truth. And he lived his life in accordance with the values, as opposed to many others that we are now realizing, were hypocrites. But extraordinary human being. Yes.
You haven't mentioned that you had a personal connection with him. Would you care to tell us about that?
I lived very close to him. I wouldn't say it was a personal connection, but I met him on several occasions. And I was always struck by not only how human he was, but how humble he was. He was a man who had, kind of set the understanding for leftists for at least 2 generations. And yet he was so humble and so willing to learn. And I remember, saying something that was wrong. And I could see that Parenti, instead of correcting me, which he should have, I would have appreciated, I could see that he was just really kind of calibrating and, kind of shuffling, his files and trying to assess whether I was right or wrong. And he didn't correct me. I wish he had. But I could see that, there's this constant humility, somebody who is willing to learn and willing to understand new things. And I think, again, that's the sign of, a master, somebody who is willing to learn from everything and everybody. And not just that, but, just a beautiful human being who I believe, changed the world, certainly changed the viewpoints of many, many important people.
Well, thank you for that, KJ. Finian, do you have anything to add to your thoughts about Michael Parenti?
Yeah, well, I can't add much more than KJ's beautiful eulogy and insights into Mr. Michael Parenti. Just to say, KJ, and Regis, that I found his writing just very powerfully lucid. I mean, he got to the point right away, and it was just such a clear, concise way to convey an analysis and truth, and very just empowering. And certainly I relied on Michael Parenti in the research for the book that we produced, this Killing Democracy. Michael Parenti is one of the main reference points in a few of the chapters. But that was a great summary by KJ, and a lovely personal touch that he was his neighbor.
Well, it's obvious that he's had a huge influence on a lot of people. He's highly respected, and he's going to be missed. He's one of those people whose voices have stood out really for decades, and he paid a great price, as anybody does who speaks out and who searches for the truth. And KJ, as you mentioned, before the term became popular, he was deplatformed. He was basically shut down. And we see the same thing happening all across the landscape today. not just in the United States, but across the West. So thank you for that testimony, KJ. I want to shift gears now. We were talking together before we came live about the impact of the Epstein files that have now flooded the internet. KJ, I'm going to start with you because in our email correspondence, you really surprised me. You said, and I'm going to paraphrase, can we talk about the Dalai Lama who is connected to Epstein? And I said, what? The Dalai Lama? Is he not like a descendant of the Buddha? Is he not like this unapproachable, I shouldn't be unapproachable, but he's all goodness and wisdom. And KJ, the things that you told me and sent to me not only shocked me, but made me aware at the vast network of, we're going to talk about the network, and it's not that Epstein is the center of it, but what's coming out now is sure making it look like he's connected to a great number of powerful people in government, in finance, in other areas of society in the quote unquote West. KJ, help us understand what's going on here.
Well, just to touch on the Dalai Lama, turns out he met with Epstein, and apparently he went to the island multiple times. He's mentioned 169 times in the Epstein files, which is not a surprise because, he has been also shown to be pedophiliac or have pedophiliac tendencies. I mean, he's publicly on the record, it's videoed, telling a kid to suck his tongue. And there is no amount of, cultural, cultural competency that can explain that away. It just doesn't make any sense. It's, out and out a pedophiliac act. And so I'm sure that after, the death, there are going to be many abuse allegations, but it's just an example of how the Western media and propaganda apparatus operates. You take a prominent exile, you turn them into a heroic figure, and then you use them over and over to attack, discredit, and delegitimate a country that the United States wants taken down. And in this case, the Dalai Lama was perfect. He was like a Solzhenitsyn type character or another person, Ai Weiwei, etc. But even more because he was supposed to have this kind of spiritual authority. But, there are first a few things we need to understand. The Dalai Lama is not the transcendent reincarnation of the historical Buddha. That's completely nonsense. Anybody who knows anything about the Buddha and Buddhism knows that the Buddha does not reincarnate. That's the entire definition. It's the awakened being who has transcended birth and rebirth. So if it's reborn, it's not the Buddha. So the Dalai Lama is not the Buddha, and he's not even the leader of Tibetan Buddhism or of Tibet. He's one of the leaders of a single sect of Tibetan Buddhism. There are at least 4, the Gelugpa, and there are 4 or 5 other major schools. Some of them don't recognize any central authority. And Tibetan Buddhism is not uniquely Tibetan. You find it in Nepal, Mongolia, and other countries. It's what we call the Vajrayana tradition. And some of them have nothing to do with the Dalai Lama. But the Dalai Lama title is actually a Chinese conferred and recognized title. It was actually started in the Ming Dynasty, and it was conferred and then grandfathered in. That was the 3rd Dalai Lama. And there's a kind of an issue around reincarnation. Reincarnation has always been a political act. It's, it's a way of creating a unified dynastic succession of theocratic power. And it also creates this continuity of patriarchal dominance through a mythology of male motherhood. Male motherhood is essentially what the reincarnation myth of the Dalai Lama is. But the Dalai Lama has been on the CIA payroll. It's well established. He was on the CIA payroll. He was spirited out by intelligence services, and he's being used as a thorn against China as a way to attack and delegitimate it for decades now. And of course, it is no surprise that he's tied to Epstein, because Epstein was a kind of a gear in a cog. He was a major node that connected the ruling imperial elite. This is how they got together. This is how they bonded over depravity, and how they coordinated their machinations together. So, let's think about Epstein for a moment. Of course, we know he was a sex trafficker. We know that he was connected to, the major titans of finance, of business, to the intelligence services, in particular Mossad, in particular the CIA. The former director met with him multiple times. He also had connections to media and cultural influences and leaders. He was very, very strongly connected to the Israeli leadership. He was connected to the WEF Davos crowd. In fact, the leader, the current director of the Davos, is now under a huge scrutiny because of his connections. And all of this just kind of tells us just the way in which the ruling global elite are connected to each other. It's simply a map of power. It's a power map. And I think that old, inscription that they used to have on, ancient maps, "Here be monsters," I think that is very, very appropriate for this. But he was completely part of the ruling elite. He was a fixer, a broker, a major node. He was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And notice how silent they are about him. He was an officer of the Trilateral Commission. And he was, on the board of Rockefeller University. So all of these things show the extraordinary power, reach, and the deeply enmeshed, interconnected, incestuous relationships between the global power elite and their depraved practices, both personally, interpersonally, and on a transnational level. What they did to those young girls on Epstein Island is exactly the same thing that they've done to entire nations across the world.
Well, KJ, I was not aware of what you just shared about the Dalai Lama and how he has been used by Mossad, the CIA, against China. I was not aware of that, and I was not aware.
Parenti actually has a good essay on that. He calls it friendly feudalism. And again, Parenti is, master of, unveiling, how things really are. But I recommend people read an essay called by Michael Parenti called Friendly Feudalism, where he shows the real nature of, this quote unquote Tibetan, resistance.
Well, we're talking about this vast network of people in finance, in politics, in business, the military-industrial complex around the world, all connected. Finian, you're sitting up there in the Emerald Isle. Far away, it seems, from a lot of this. What's your take, and what are people in Ireland thinking about what's being revealed now in terms of the Epstein files? Finian. your thoughts on all of this?
I suppose we're just observing it like everybody else, just with awe and kind of disgust of the kind of the level, the saturated level of perversity in the the ruling class of the United States and across Europe. I mean, Epstein had kind of sort of got himself involved with the British royals and the Norwegian royals. So I mean, I think KJ has nailed it. This was an operation, a kind of a blackmail operation to compromise people, not just kind of like from their own personal perversities, the personal level. I mean, this was a kind of a systematic operation to compromise people, to get blackmail on them, and to control individuals and to exert all sorts of leverage over them. And it's totally consistent. Regis, when you look at how pathetic the Western politicians in general are, they're so acquiescent, so compliant, malleable to the US diktat, and it certainly is very consistent with a blackmail operation, and their kind of enfeeblement in terms of being autonomous politicians. They're completely controlled, and something like this massive blackmail operation that Epstein was evidently running on behalf of Mossad and probably the CIA, this is kind of demonstrated by the complete lack of political independence by Western politicians. I mean, in Britain, you have the Mandelson. He was the former foreign secretary and latterly the ambassador to the US, completely, for the want of a better word, in bed with Epstein up to his eyeballs. And this is how the black arts work. Compromising people, and then they're bought and they're controllable, and that's it.
Yeah.
KJ, go ahead, KJ.
Yeah, I mean, the key takeaway and bringing it back to Parenti is what Parenti himself said. He said, the ruling imperial capitalist class tells you their opponents in other countries are corrupt, violent, and depraved. But actually, Parenti says, it's the real ones who are in power that are corrupt, violent, and depraved beyond belief. And they also meet and consort with each other. It's not a conspiracy. Parenti says that, when they call it conspiracy, of course they're conspiring. They traffic, they hurt, and they damage people and states and governments. But also they consort and they conspire. They scheme and they enact genocide and justify it. They scheme and enact coups. They scheme and they enact trafficking and, violence and blackmail. And of course they have, their hangers on. So what he demonstrates is the utter depravity of the imperial ruling class. It's that extraordinary. He's shown us the real face of empire and who its power brokers and agents were.
And
KJ, I have to ask you. You mentioned they. You mentioned the ruling class. I think it's important not to focus on Epstein as the nucleus of this network. He's merely a player in this vast network. But KJ, I have to ask you, who the heck are they, this ruling class? Can you shed some light on that?
Well, I think, the term NICIMAT is quite useful. It's the military-industrial complex. It's the media academic think tank complex. It's the cultural titans, as I said, the titans of finance, of business, of tech, of the intelligence services, of cultural leaders, all of this. It's what we refer to as the deep state. And what the Epstein files have done is they've given us a map It's a kind of a power map. We see the connections between all of them, that they're all working together, coordinating together, and I think it's foundationally delegitimating. It tells us, the connection between Davos and Bill Gates and Epstein and Peter Thiel, the PayPal mafia, and the tech titans of Silicon Valley, and the U.S. leaders and the European leadership. They're all connected. They're
Okay.
all. Yes.
Okay. The last thing you just said, that the Western leaders are connected. This is not just focused on the United States of America and what people think is the American deep state. This is, I don't want to call it global because I'm not sure that it is, but it is certainly what people refer to as West, including United States and Europe. And Finian had mentioned as far away north as Norway have been implicated with ties to Epstein. Finian,
Well,
what are your thoughts?
Well, there's plenty of history, Regis, to show that the CIA, the MI6, all these European counterparts are really working together. They have the same kind of political outlook on the world, the defense of capitalism, the defense of empire. So it's quite logical and quite consistent that they would all be working together. Perhaps the CIA, the Mossad might be the kind of a primary players or drivers, but they're all very much working together. In my view, MI6, the British, the French, the Germans especially. I mean, they're all compromised by the deep state that KJ has mentioned. But it does explain to me just how craven and how pathetic the Europeans are in the face of the American power, the emperor, that they commit economic suicide over Nord Stream and the cutting off of Russian gas. I mean, it's so gobsmacking in its stupidity and self-harm that you do have to wonder how do these politicians, how are they so craven, how are they so malleable? And a blackmail operation that Epstein is revealing, or his scandal is revealing, would explain a lot of how the political class is controlled by the deep state.
Finian, you mentioned a couple of things. It's kind of dangerous to go there, but it's the use of blackmail. It's the use of blackmail to compromise individuals at different levels that we've been talking about: government, finance, business, the Mickey Mac, as KJ mentions, and our good friend Ray McGovern coined that Mickey Mac. But it is blackmail, and Epstein, it seems like he's the center of this, at least in the United States and I think parts of Europe, but certainly in the United States. So many of these people have been trapped, have been invited to go on his plane, the Lolita Express, and go to his island. People at the highest levels of government, finance, and business, and the names are just beginning to come out. They have been compromised. I am quite sure, and you mentioned the CIA and Mossad, wherever they've been, whether it's Epstein's mansion on, I guess, the Upper East Side of Manhattan, on his plane, on his island, all of these visitors have been videotaped, have been photographed, and have been compromised. And this is how I think in what you're saying, the network has worked. It's an incredibly powerful tool to compromise people, to get them to do exactly what they're told. And
Regis, if we think it's shocking, and it is, but I mean, and when you consider about how much redaction has been involved, you can only imagine the full extent of this. If what we're saying is heavily redacted information, well, I mean, that does point that it's like the tip of an iceberg in terms of the dirt and the horror that is underlying the whole thing. And what other politicians, and the guy in the White House at the minute, Trump, mentioned thousands of times, but according to himself, he's not implicated. But I mean, one would have to wonder, how can you be mentioned thousands of times in a heavily redacted forum and expect people to believe that you're not implicated? And it does kind of connect with a lot of the international conflict and aggression and violence that we're witnessing going on under the Trump administration. And I wonder, is this just a part of the tactic to distract from very bad politics from the Epstein fallout for Trump? He's using killing and war, vandalism to distract from, the obscenities of Epstein. I mean, it's really, infernal, the combination here. That's my view anyway. I don't need to impose on your views, guys.
KJ, do you have a response to that?
Well, certainly that is something that happens a lot when they need to distract from a domestic scandal, as well as internal contradictions of a collapsing economy. War is the emergency button. It's the defibrillator that they use. And so that is definitely a possibility. And the escalation to Iran, war with Iran, was very, very disturbing. But also, I want to kind of place this once again into a larger context. This kind of stuff, this kind of abuse, is not unusual, and it's been flagged many, many times before. I think a question that has to be asked is, why did the scandal erupt now? Because we know that it's been ongoing for decades. Why did it erupt now? And I think if we start to unpack that question, then we'll start to have a clearer understanding of what happened. I mean, I'll just give you one example. In 2011, Dominique Strauss-Kahn was the head of the IMF, and he was expected to become the top French presidential candidate. And he was taken down by a sex scandal. He sexually assaulted, or it was alleged that he sexually assaulted a housekeeper in a hotel. And it turns out that he has a long and sordid history of this type of behavior, regardless of the specifics of that particular case. But why did this happen? Well, first, because he was top presidential candidate, but also because he was considering de-dollarizing the IMF. And so clearly, somebody painted a target on him. The question here is, why are the Epstein files being released? Well, of course, congressional demand, etc. But how this entire situation became unraveled is something that needs to be asked. And we also need to ask not only who are the people involved, but also who benefits from this. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's all, a cesspit of iniquity. But still, we have to ask that question and see, cui bono, who is benefiting, or what are they seeking to benefit from this? I've heard people say, well, it's just the sheer brazenness that they're bragging about it, and they're saying, you can't do anything about it. This is how it is. The powerful do what they will, the weak suffer what they must. That's one interpretation. But I think there are other threads that we need to tug on and unravel in order to fully understand the implications of what's going on. Certainly, It is a foundationally delegitimating crisis of the Western imperium. It's, one of the biggest, certainly in my lifetime. And it points to the complete and total bankruptcy of the Western liberal imperial project, posed as democracy and enlightenment and what have you. But how it's happening and why it's happening is, I think, important to observe.
KJ, you mentioned it's a really good point. I want to ask both of you, because I think something extraordinary just happened this past week that indicates maybe that there's a break, a fissure between the powerful. And the Clintons were subpoenaed to appear before a congressional subcommittee examining the whole Epstein affair. And the Clintons at first refused to go there and then decided to appear. And they did something that I thought was extraordinary. They said, "We will only testify on live television." And that meant something to me. But before I give my own opinion, I'd like to know what you two thought about that as a chess move. And well, anyway, what do you make of that? Finian, I'll go to you first, and then we'll go to KJ.
Regis, I'm going to let KJ take this because I didn't really make any strong note on that development. I was just vaguely aware of it. But KJ, please.
Yeah, KJ, go ahead.
Yeah, this is pure speculation on my part. But first, we know how brazen Bill Clinton is. I mean, this is the man who says, I did not have sex with that woman. He did. And then he, kind of does this little dissertation on the meaning of is, the copula, how appropriate, right? So, but I think that there is a veiled threat, and this is just my little, guess. There's a veiled threat, which he's saying that we are all implicated, or at least some of you who want to question me are implicated, and therefore you start, putting me on the rack, and I will, bring the temple down over you. I think that's I think that's what the threat is, and as a result of that, I think
KJ, what's the live TV testimony about then? How does that tie in with the threat you're speculating about?
Well, he wants to make sure that he's not censored. I mean, it's essentially the threat. I can speak, but I can say a lot of things that a lot of you will find uncomfortable. So perhaps you might want to reconsider the whole affair. It's just a guess.
Yeah. And no, I agree with you. I think it was a signal to everybody in Congress. It was a signal to Donald Trump. You want to pursue this? You want to persecute me and my wife? We're going to bring the whole house of cards down. I think basically the way I interpret it, that was the message. We're seeing this network of people. They're certainly not at the top, but in the United States of America, they are at the top of this vast network. And what I see is either an attempt to bring it all down or to shut it all down. And people will just continue to say, well, let's keep analyzing these Epstein files, millions of them, all of these thousands of photographs. But I want to come back to this point, because I have felt for several weeks now, screw the Epstein files. Let's listen to the victims. Let's listen to the victims. Let's put them on the front pages. Let's put them all across the networks in the United States. Let's bring them into these congressional hearings and make them all public, televised across the country. Let them tell their story. KJ, I'm going to come to you first, and then Finian, what are your thoughts? That's my feeling. Screw the Epstein files. I want to hear from the victims.
Well, I think the first thing to point out is, the release is highly, highly selective, highly, highly redacted, completely contextless. And so that, is not really helpful. So I think it is important to hear from the victims. Absolutely. And I think we have seen a little hint of what they might say, in which they have said it was not just about trafficking. They said much, much more was going on than meets the eye. The other thing is that we also have to be mindful is that, at least one of these young women, or one of these women now, has died abruptly under suspicious circumstances. So, if it implicates the entire system, then we have to understand, then we have to ask the question, how safe is it for, some of the victims to speak out? What are the safeguards that can be built in to protect them? Perhaps speaking out is the best safety. I don't know. But I think I agree, we need to hear the testimony. And the question is, can it be told in a way that does not cause further victimization and also gets to the heart of the situation? I have a feeling that, as I said, Epstein was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations for 15 years. Okay. Yeah. Do you think that he just reached out to a few of them, or is it the entire council which is implicated?
And the Trilateral Commission, and the Rockefellers.
Yes.
This network is unbelievable when you start connecting the dots, KJ.
Absolutely.
Now, you're hinting at more nefarious things than just child trafficking for pedophiles. And I'm not going to be hesitating at all to bring this up, because it is beginning to come out. These people have been involved in satanic rituals and child sacrifice. And I don't know whether you two want to talk about this, but it's beginning to come out. It's not just in the United States. It's across, I think, the Western world. What is happening is more horrific than just pedophilia. Abusing young girls, children, by powerful men. I think that it goes much deeper than that. I want your thoughts on that, if you care. Finian, do you want to start?
Well, two things, Regis. I think it does speak of the media control that we live under. I mean, this is just astonishing, the whole obscenity of the whole affair and what it's pointing to. And yet there does seem to be, my sense is that there's a kind of an attempt to contain it. I know the media has been apparently full of Epstein, but at the same time, like what you were saying there, a very sensible proposal is, like, let's hear more from the victims. But I do feel that the media is trying in a way to contain it or to suppress it. So that's one thing. Secondly, it just speaks of the kind of psychopathy in the for those in power, and we see it over and over again with the destruction of nations, the Gaza genocide going on relentlessly for over 2 years, and just the appalling, the absolute callous disregard of human life that the capitalist ruling class has towards human beings. And it's very consistent, albeit horrific, that they would then turn their perverted predilections in the way that the Epstein affair reveals. But it's really, as KJ was pointing out, completely consistent with the systematic and gargantuan, abuse of human life that it operates under the capitalist system. So it's all very integrated and part of the whole problem. It speaks, Regis, to me of a kind of a decadence. What Epstein is, the whole affairs, and I agree with you, he's only a cog in the whole system, and he's not the main player. But it does speak of the decadence and the absolute corruption of the entire system. It's a bit like, Babylon, or some kind of like a iconic sort of a place in history where it's just falling apart through its own absolute moral decadence and corruption. In that way, I see it as a good thing. Horrible, but it's a good thing in that it's revealing, it's opening people's eyes to the horror of the sort of the complete lack of human compassion or human morals towards other human beings that the capitalist imperialist system is built on.
Somebody described it recently, Finian, as Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
KJ, you want to follow up on that?
Well, I think there's a term that's sometimes being used, that there's a kind of mysticism of cruelty or a mysticism of power, that you have this utter depravity that finds expression through, ritual violence and, humiliation. But I want to push back a little bit on that. I don't think that it may or may not be the case. I don't know. I haven't researched it enough. But I would simply say that pedophilia itself is child sacrifice. It is a violation on the most foundational level of what it means to be human. We don't need to add, a ritual dimension to it. The ritual dimension makes it worse, but we don't need that to compare evils, if you will. Once again, I want to come back to the fact that the ruling imperial elite destroys and genocides countries on a whim. Is it any surprise that they would do the same thing to individuals? I think that's the thing that we need to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point, KJ. I don't think we can talk about this enough as more and more is revealed and comes out about the Epstein files and the who will gradually be revealed who are involved in it. It isn't just Clinton. It's not just Bill Gates. It's not just Larry Summers and some of these other bigwigs. There are a lot more names that I think are going to come out. But we'll continue to talk about this, because I think I said months ago, when Trump got elected and they started talking about his relationship with Epstein, I said, this little Epstein thing is not going to go away. 12 months later, it's exploded. Now, with the time that we have left, I want to get to something that I think is really important for the future of humanity, because that's how dangerous it is. It's Iran. And Donald Trump has declared, as he has so many times, I've sent the largest naval armada in history to the Persian Gulf. I've got aircraft carriers. I've got destroyers with anti-missile defense systems. I've got thousands of American troops. And, if Iran doesn't come around and make a deal, I'm going to attack. Now, guys, Russia and China have been clear that they have been friends with Iran. They have invested in Iran's infrastructure, and reportedly they have both invested militarily in support of Iran. Guys, we're talking about Are we talking about the unthinkable, KJ?
I think it's possible. I mean, I've discussed this issue on other fora. On the one hand, you see tremendous preparation and momentum for war. On the other hand, you do see that the US seems to be building out some off ramps for itself, primarily around quote unquote negotiation. Now, do we know if the negotiation is in good faith, given that the US is not agreement capable, as the Russians have said? We don't know. Is the negotiation simply more subterfuge as they used when they did the midnight hammer strike? We don't know. But so it's possible that the US is amassing for a fight, amassing to attack. But the thing is, Iran is no pushover. And if they decide to attack Iran, Iran has threatened total war. They have threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. They've threatened to hit US bases, of which there are numerous bases which are highly vulnerable. And we also saw in the previous attack, Midnight Hammer, during the 12-day war, was that Iran was able to give as good as it got. And the US and the Israelis actually had their missile defense systems depleted. I mean, on one estimate, 15% of all THAAD missiles were depleted trying to, neutralize the Iranian counterattack, which, according to the Iranians, was, just a kind of a low-grade signal. So if that's the case, then the Trump administration needs to think very hard whether this is, whether they want to get into this fight. If the dog chases the truck and finally catches up, then what are you going to do? What Iran has signaled is that, it's stopped the truck and it's starting to speak with authority. And they've said that if the US attacks, it will not be a limited engagement. Iran will not be sending, tit for tat or minimal signaling in response, that it will actually respond with full-on war. And we know that the US has no ground game, certainly not in Iran, which is 3.5 times the size of Iraq, and which is capable of defending itself. It has hardened silos, a massive missile attack capacity. Israel is very vulnerable because it has no strategic depth, as again we saw during the 12-day war. And so hopefully the cooler heads, the better angels of this administration are looking for a climb down. But it remains to be seen. I think we're in a very, very dangerous position. There is desperation. There's also the need to distract from domestic scandal. And we know that the next step up the escalation ladder is nuclear war. And so that is the ultimate catastrophe that we could be facing.
Yeah. Finian, from the Emerald Isle, how do you look at it? How do people in Ireland look at what's happening in the Middle East?
Well, I can't speak for other people here, Regis, because there's so much, bad influence from Western media. I mean, the Irish media, state media, is in my view, a joke. It's just really regurgitating American media. So, people here wouldn't have a great media service to form critical opinion. There would be people who are critical, but by and large, we would be very much sort of similar to, other audiences that are, dominated by fake news and, but well said by KJ there, Regis. But, I'm just going to be a little bit kind of devil's advocate here, Regis. And I'm just so sick of American imperialist bullying. I'm really so sick. I'm so really disgusted and nauseated by it. I kind of, in part of me, would like to see them just trying it too much with Iran and just getting their arses well kicked. Do you know? I mean, if Trump starts a war with Iran, it's going to be disastrous for the American economy. As KJ points out, the Iranians can just shut down the global oil trade, send the dollar through the floor, and really bring on the nemesis that the American imperialist power have been courting for decades. So part of me, I'm not afraid, or I should, I don't think we should rule out that there could be some actually positive result from a confrontation with the United States if it brings the empire down. And admittedly, that's a reckless course. It could be a reckless course, and we don't want to go to a nuclear war. But I think the American bully, its bluff has to be called at some point. And I think Russia and China would do well to offer a little bit more proactive support towards Iran. I'm not saying that they should kind of provoke the US with a military threat, but I mean, China could do a lot of damage with its holdings of American treasury bills, and a kind of a little hint there that they're going to drop them, cash them in. I mean, I think Russia and Iran should do Russia and China should do more to assert their alliance or their support for Iran, and let the US know that it can't just keep on picking off one nation after another.
Very interesting, Finian. We've got a few minutes left before we hit an hour, but I'm not really too concerned about the deadline. We're not talking about just the United States threatening Iran, which is an ally of both Russia and China. At the same time, Trump is talking about strangulating Cuba, choking it off. And I read today where Russia has indicated it will continue sending oil to Cuba. I want to finish on that note, because we're seeing the same thing happening in Iran, in Cuba. We saw it in Venezuela. What will happen? Could there be an immediate military confrontation over Russia and even China trying to assist Cuba to maintain a free Cuba? Let's finish on that thought. KJ.
Well, the Chinese government has been very, very strong. They've essentially said, hands off Cuba. Don't mess with Cuba. They've been very, very strong rhetorically. What does that translate to in material terms? That remains to be seen. But I think there is significant material assistance being given, just as there's significant material assistance being given to Iran, as far as I can tell. For example, the Global Times actually published a set of potential targets, images of US bases on their website, which is kind of extraordinary. Of course, make of that what you will, but anyway, I think that China will not let Cuba fall. And we know that Cuba is very, very vulnerable. Since December, it has had zero fuel, according to the Cuban leadership. Essentially, as they call it, it's a genocidal blockade. What they did to Gaza in terms of blockading it, they're trying to do to Cuba. And this has been a decades-long project. They have always wanted to destroy Cuba, just as, for example, they wanted to destroy Gaza, they wanted to destroy North Korea. In the case of North Korea, they almost collapsed. They went through what they referred to as the arduous march, but they came out stronger on the other end. And I think that Cuba is also going to head into yet another horrific period of privation. This is usually the US pattern. Before it attacks and destroys a country, it wants to weaken it as much as possible. It's like when they bring in a bull in for a bullfight, you need to understand that bull has been starved, beaten, drugged, dehydrated for days. before it's brought into the bullfighting arena. It's the similar pattern, and I think they're trying to do the same thing, creating an almost total blockade. And Cuba is responding. They're trying to respond by reaching out and building out sustainable sources of energy. And I think that's one of the key areas where China will be helpful. It's helping Cuba, but also the entire global South, build out renewable forms of energy generation. I think that will make the difference.
Finian, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I saw there, Regis and KJ, that the US is releasing more humanitarian aid to Cuba. I mean, it's an insult, but they're going to, the State Department is going to send $9 million to Cuba to recover from this storm, the hurricane that hit last October. I mean, the Cubans are completely derisory about this hypocrisy, but it does suggest that, it's a kind of a form of seeding color revolution. You've strangulated the country with this fuel blockade, and which is intensified with Venezuela cut off and Mexico cut off, and now they're going to send in some what they call humanitarian aid from the State Department. And it's kind of like it'll be interesting to see where that aid actually goes to, but it does suggest to me that it's a form of trying to incite color revolution by maybe giving some privilege to some sectors of the Cuban society and over the vast majority. So Cuba's in the crosshairs. It's no doubt about it, and it's of course been a long time coming. There was I saw a letter, a declassified letter memo from the State Department in 1960. Regis and KJ, dated 1960, the State Department, where they talked about Fidel Castro's, command of the revolution was so popular that their strategy would be to strangulate the country and with mass hunger and poverty to try to destabilize and then overthrow the revolutionary government. So, I mean, this has been going on for over 60 years. Trump's just ramping it up. I think China and Russia need to demonstrate very strong support for Cuba, because this is just a process of picking off one country after another. Venezuela, Cuba, Iran. I mean, not that they've succeeded with Cuba or Iran just yet, but there is a process of picking off the perceived weaker members of a group. And I think if Russia and China aren't they're in danger of being maybe a little bit, if they're complacent about this, that they will be making themselves more vulnerable to the aggression that the United States has in store for them. I mean, like on one hand, Trump is talking about peace in Ukraine with Russia, trying some sort of peace settlement, but yet the Trump administration is seizing Russian cargo ships on the high seas and slapping, intensifying sanctions on key Russian oil industries, bullying other countries to cease buying Russian oil. I mean, this is aggression towards Russia. That the Ukraine so-called diplomacy really belies, as with China too. So I think, not that I am trying to tell the Russian government or the Chinese government what to do, far from it. But I think, the agenda is one of aggression, and the Russia and China would do well to check that before it goes too far, and check it by, stepping up the support for the likes of Cuba. And why not make a little veiled threat that, hey, you push too much, we've got firepower too. We're not talking about declaring war, but a little bit more of a bare the teeth a little bit more towards Uncle Sam, because I think Uncle Sam's a paper tiger at this stage, and they've just kind of like they've just outlived their imperial bullying too much.
I agree with Finian, and I still want to point out that the U.S. is a paper tiger with nuclear weapons. So as it becomes more and more enfeebled, it's more and more likely to take extreme measures, including against its own allies. So I still think that, discretion is the better part of valor. The Chinese have said they've strongly condemned the U.S. actions. They've told the U.S. to stop depriving the Cuban people of their right to subsistence and development, to stop its violations of international law, and to immediately lift its blockade and sanctions on Cuba. They said they will continue to provide support and assistance to Cuba. And they say, we're confident that under the strong leadership of the party and the government, the Cuban people will tide over the current difficulty. Those are strong words for the Chinese. I think once again, the U.S. may have overestimated their capacity and underestimated the resilience of the Cuban people, as well as the support that it has.
Mm-hmm.
KJ, Finian, I want to thank you. This has been a very important and insightful conversation. We're not finished. We'll have to continue because these things that we're talking about are not going away. They're only going to become more relevant, more visible, and I think more important in terms of, my God, the unthinkable. I can't thank you enough, guys. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
KJ, thank you.